Welcome to the social-engineer.org podcast number 71.
Go, Jordan. Say it.
Well, say what? Welcome to podcast number 71.
You see, Dave's not even here, and we're just lost. And this is
We're completely lost.
So listen, listeners, this is serious. Dave has abandoned us once again, even though he claimed that our guest this month he loved more than I can ever love him, and he didn't show.
Well, I vote that while he's out, we do a count on the Hornsby versus no Hornsby polls.
I think the for Hornsby was 1, and the not for Hornsby was probably about 16 million.
Yeah, Jordan, while you were out, there was huge controversy, continuing controversy about whether or not, we needed to ban Bruce Hornsby from the show.
As a musical talent.
Yes, as a musical talent.
And we started a Twitter battle. And we had 2 hashtags, and we asked all the listeners to hashtag, if you want Hornsby, to put Hornsby for hugs.
Hugs for Hornsby,
Hugs for Hornsby, right? And if you didn't, no Hornsby, please. Those were the 2 hashtags. And I think Dave hired a bot because there was a 2-day span where there was like hundreds of Hornsby for hugs coming in.
Oh, God.
And then I think he hired a bot for no Hornsby, please, like just to make it fair. So there's just, if you do a search on the hashtags, it's just ridiculous right now. There's just too many for both.
Perfect.
I think from real humans, we're getting mostly no Hornsby, please. And there's nobody here to argue that. So I think I'm right.
Yeah, Jordan, unless you wanted to put in a vote for Hornsby.
I don't think I'm going to put in a vote for Hornsby.
Completely your prerogative.
See, Jordan's a smart man. Why have Hornsby? Why? We don't need him.
Not unless he's going to come on as a guest.
Listen, if Hornsby comes on a guest, we will make the whole podcast Hornsby music. So if you're listening, Bruce, come on. We invited you twice already. We haven't even heard back from your people. Start listening to this podcast. Come on and redeem yourself.
Yeah, if anybody out there knows Bruce Hornsby, call us.
Yeah. So anyhow, besides that, Ping's not here. She's on a call. Dave's on a plane. So it is Jordan, Michelle, and I. So how is it going?
Dave's on a plane. It sounds like a movie from
Sam L.
Jackson. I'm tired of all these Daves on this plane.
Yeah, I'm tired of Dave's on the podcast. That's for sure. Dave.
Time to open some really large windows.
We don't need large windows anymore. Dave's like barely there. He's got the wonderfully girlish figure these days.
Dave lost like 3 humans.
Really? I need to lose maybe like a giant cat.
Yeah, no, Dave lost a lot of weight.
Laying off bacon and living the good life.
Are you going to go to DerbyCon?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so actually that brings up what we're doing. So let's talk about that, Michelle.
Alrighty.
Okay. Black Hat training completely sold out. I mean,
Nice.
Yeah, it's just over. It's done. There's not even a seat left. I have people calling and begging, and there's just absolutely no room, right? So that's sold out. That's Vegas. For all of you Michelle fans out there, you're going to have a once-in-a-lifetime chance to get a personal autograph from Michelle. Now, I'm going to put a teaser out there. She has a cool little thing. We're not going to say what it is, that if you get a book autograph from her, it's something very personal she does. If you want to see what it is, you got to come.
Wow, that sounds vaguely, I don't know. This is a PG-rated show.
Well, personal doesn't have to be bad. It's a very personal thing. And you can come and see what it is at the Black Hat Bookstore, Wednesday, 10 a.m. And I'm channeling my inner Ping. She's going to say, what Wednesday is it? Since they don't know. It's Wednesday, August 5th. 10 a.m. at the BH Bookstore. We'll be signing books and taking pictures and kissing babies and, generally blessing the crowds and things like that. So
yeah, or just come by and say hi. That's good too.
Oh, yeah, or that too. Yeah, that would be fun. Okay, now I'll get to the other DEF CON stuff in a minute. But for training, DerbyCon, we're going to be out there. We got our 2-day OSINT class. Unfortunately, for anyone else who's interested, completely sold out. So it is no longer available. We sold that out quite quickly too, which is shocking and amazing and happiness. And then we have a couple cool events out there. We're doing a live podcast. We'll have our polygraph guy back out there and some other interesting things. So stay tuned on the site for that. Then our last APSE class for 2015. Last one, 2015 ever, is October 5 through 9 in
Baltimore, Maryland.
So if you want in on that, they do have good oysters, and we'll be eating them. So we need you to come to that class, people, because we can't go and eat oysters. So that's really the reason to come to the class, in my opinion. And we just got invited to teach at Black Hat Amsterdam. So we're going to do our 2-day OSINT class at Amsterdam Black Hat. And that date, oh boy.
That is November 10th and 11th, and registration is open now.
You saved me. I thought like Ping will be in the background yelling at me.
I wanted to save you from being yelled at later.
Thank you. So let's see. We got room in that class still. It's filling up, but we got room in that class. The link is on the website, on our website, so you can go right to social-engineer.com and see all of our training that's coming up. And very soon we will be releasing the 2016 training schedule. Now, of course, one of the big things that we got to mention is DEF CON, happening also in August, just coming up in 3 weeks or so, 3.5 weeks. We have, this year DEF CON gave us like a house. Like we have 3,000 square feet of space. So we're like, well, what are we going to do with all this space? Well, we got a Thursday competition we're calling Mission SE Impossible. Pretty awesome. Details on the site. We got the SECTF. We have the SECTF for kids, and we have the SE Village with all of its speeches. I think there's like 12 speeches, 14 contestants, 20 kids. I mean, it's gonna be pretty nuts this year. So that's happening in August, and then of course our live podcast out there, which you should definitely come and be a part of on Sunday in August. So we're forward to that all happening.
Jordan, are you going to be in Las Vegas this year?
I should be, yeah. I don't know if I'll be at DEF CON. I know I won't be at Black Hat, but I would love to come by and do that. That'd be rad.
Well, you haven't been there since like a couple years, right?
I think the last time I spoke was at the Social Engineering Village at DEF CON 2000. Seriously, it was like 2013 or 12.
I think it was 2 years ago.
Well, man, we're in a whole new hotel this year.
Oh, yeah?
There's like 3 million square feet of space over 2 hotels.
Which hotel?
Bally's in Paris. I guess Bally's and Paris are connected under the ground. And that's where it's being held.
That's so Vegas. Like, we could just have people cross the street. Nah, let's build an underground train.
It's not a train. It's a walkway that's like a mile long. But,
most people in Vegas can't walk a mile. Have you seen? I mean, you've seen.
No, we've been to Vegas, years and years. It's an awesome place for freak shows.
It's one after the other of a lot of people who need to walk a mile.
Well, then they should come to DEF CON because it will help.
And you just walk back and forth between hotels.
Yeah, we could put our competitions at different sides of the hallway. Of course, my team will quit on me, and I won't have anyone there to support me.
That's
I was going to say, I don't want to walk a mile. So, we've got to figure something out.
We'll give you a bicycle.
A bicycle. Well, but don't give her any ideas. She already wants corporate segways.
Yeah, that was going to be my vote. Absolutely.
Nice. Yeah, corporate segways. What could go wrong?
No, nothing. Right. The guy who invented segways died on one, so nothing could go wrong, obviously.
Right.
Yeah.
My gosh. Yeah, no, I think it would be really good. I mean, last time I spoke at DEF CON, I ended up on NPR like a week after that.
Of course. Well, that's what DEF CON does. We have a ton of stuff going on out there. We got our sponsors for DEF CON, which we must mention.
Oh, yes, that's right.
We have Trusted Sec, of course, Dave, who doesn't support us here physically with the podcast, but he does support us with all the events going on at DEF CON. We have Fishline, which is our premier fishing vendor. We love those guys and their team, and they'll be out there with us too. And we have Secure Cog, but it's also White Canvas Group. So White Canvas Group owns a company called Secure Cog, and they're out there. And actually, we got a lot of stuff going on with them. One of their main guys, Tim, who's a good buddy of ours, he'll be a judge with us this year. They got a speech going on, so this will be a pretty exciting year with them. And then Pindrop Security, which Pindrop has been sponsoring us, boy, man, now what is it, 3 or 4 years?
Yeah.
They do a lot of phone-based security, so they're a really interesting company. And, of course, the CTF is something of high interest to them, especially the report that we produce afterward. So they've been very big supporters and sponsors. We're happy. And if you want to check any of those companies out, all their links are on our website, on the social-engineer.org site. You can check that out there. Of course, we put them in the newsletter if you haven't signed up for that. The newsletter just came out last week, so you can probably find a version of that on the web shortly. And they're all over the website, so you can got their sites there. Okay, now let's talk about our guest. So for 70 months, I've been begging this guy to come on the podcast. 70, that sounds really long, doesn't it?
It's a long time.
It's a long time. 70 months. I remember way back when I first started this podcast with Maddie and Jim, and I was asking this guy to come on the podcast, and he's a self-proclaimed guy that doesn't say I'm not a social engineer, but he is one of the people who have been in this community forever, and it is HD Moore. HD Moore is joining us this month on the podcast. So we're going to talk about Metasploit. We're going to talk about some of the payloads that he's helped build in Metasploit that can be used for social engineering. And we'll just talk about the things he's seen as far as techniques over the last few years and how they've garnered more SE attacks. So, HD Moore. HD, nice to have you on the podcast.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So I think probably before we get into anything, because this is probably the most important question on every listener's mind, is Go Hornsby or Hornsby for Hugs? Which hashtag you going for?
What's a Hornsby?
Oh, yes. Oh, beautiful. Dave.
Dave's going to be so hurt.
Oh, Dave. And, Dave had this whole thing. I love HD more than anyone on earth. I'm going to be on the podcast, and he never shows. And now his hero doesn't even know who Hornsby is. Love it.
Paying the price now, I'm telling you.
We could just end the podcast right now. I'm okay with that. That was it. 70 months.
70 months of waiting for that verdict.
Yeah. 70 months I've been begging HD to come on the podcast. I get him, and we're going to end it in 2 minutes.
It's true. It's been a while since we chatted about this.
Yeah, I mean, Matt, you remember way back in the Maddie days, we had talked about having you on, and it was purely SE and psych and stuff. And now I think there's a lot more things that we could talk about over the years. Like, how long you've been active in this in the community? It's been like forever.
Mid to late 90s, basically.
Yeah. So you've seen the changes over the years in the way that attacks have occurred, especially in the use of social engineering. What do you think? What do you think that SE is going to continue to be used more and more? Do you think we're going to start seeing more of a twist back to, network and software hacking, or what do you think we're going to see?
I mean, if you look at all the trends so far, I mean, just looking at the Metasploit framework, for example, the number of exploits that we get that target client-side applications has only grown since the mid-2000s. Late 90s, we'd always joke about, if you can get someone to visit a web page, of course you own them, because you can basically run arbitrary code in your system through so many different methods. It wasn't even worth considering that was an attack vector. It was just assumed that if you can get them to open an email or to visit a website of your choosing, you're going to get a shell. And, sadly, 20 years later, nothing has really changed. We're still in position today.
Isn't that the sad truth? I remember making my first malicious PDF with Metasploit. I remember that tutorial because it was like 8 pages long, and, it was new, and having to encode the interpreter reverse shell in the PDF. I remember all of that, and that was really exciting, and now it's just a basic part of attack vectors.
The attacks have gotten a lot more complicated too. What used to be, sticking an executable into a PDF and send it to the victim, you now have these multi-layer ROP exploits that bypass all sorts of exploit mitigations. You're seeing folks do things like embed, Flash exploits into PDFs, into Word documents. The amount of ways that folks are both encoding and evading exploit mitigations is just kind of ridiculous. It's good to see that there's still innovation happening in the exploit side, but unfortunately, most of the innovation is still happening by the black hats who use it before the defenders even get a chance to, identify or work at this stuff. What is it? If you look at the last, 15 to 20 Flash vulnerabilities over the years, I want to say at least 80% of them were found in the wild exploiting active users.
I actually didn't know that statistic. That's kind of amazing.
It makes sense, though, because why would you come up with that security protocol? And this is my naivete talking probably, but why would you come up with a security protocol or some sort of fix for something that's not broken when there's so many things that are already broken? Right? And I guess offensive security, that's the whole point, right? Find things first. But if you're constantly going to be chasing people who are making money doing the bad stuff and probably making easier money than the guys doing the good stuff, it won't always be that way.
Pretty much. I mean, the attacks these days are pretty much water being poured into a colander. Either way, there's still going to be another hole. You can, put as many hands under it as you want, but it's still going to find a way around it because the attacks still, follow the path of least resistance.
Right.
And that's an interesting analogy, the pouring water in a colander, because oftentimes when we talk to clients, that's the way they feel. They feel like, well, if there's no way to get your hands around the problem, if there's no way to catch all the drops, then why even try? And it seems like the advent of using social engineering and like every attack vector makes them feel even more hopeless.
And it's going to keep getting worse. I mean, if you look at the way that networks are changing, that businesses are changing, we talk about BYOD and, that, parameter is gone and so on, but it's actually becoming much more truthful for reasons that have nothing to do with those two things. If you look at the way that, IPv4 routed IPs, IANA is now actually having to use their reserved IP waitlist policy at this point. That'll happen fairly recently. So as folks move to IPv6, you will no longer have direct attacks on devices unless you're very local to the target. For example, at a Wi-Fi access point, things like that. So what's going to happen instead is almost all the future attacks are going to move towards this direct targeting of the endpoint through social engineering and client-side vectors. And that's just going to keep scaling forward. And of course, visibility for corporations is an all-time low at the endpoint level these days.
And I know I shouldn't be amazed because this is what I do for a living, but still it constantly kind of shocks me a little bit when we start doing work for companies and we see how much people put out on their social media profiles. Like just how much about their life is out there. I mean, just this morning, we were talking as a company and one of my employees found a client and their employees are posting pictures of themselves with their badges, full on badges just on social media. And this is, 2015 just happened this morning. After how many news articles about how dangerous that is? How many times has this been mentioned that this is, one of the ways that attacks occur, and yet we still see it all the time.
I mean, that, draws back to the argument, you can't fix stupid, but in reality, it's not stupid. It's ignorance. It's being social. So what's your view on this? Do you think you can fix social engineering? Do you think training is actually the answer?
I love it. You just turned the interview around. That's great. That's a really important topic to me because we in our company, like we never promote this is just human stupidity because it's not. Like I constantly tell this story when I talk and educate on this. Last year, Michelle and I sent 3.2 million phishing emails. That's a butt ton of phishing emails. And I clicked on a fish, right? So we sent 3.2 million phishing emails and I had a book published in April all about phishing. And I still clicked on a phishing email.
That's awesome.
All right. And I tell people the story and not to embarrass myself, but to say, I would say, somewhat without trying to sound arrogant, I'm somewhat of an expert when it comes to phishing and I clicked on a phishing email. So is that because I'm stupid? No, that's because it was perfect phishing email for me. I had just ordered a bunch of stuff from Amazon for a conference we were going to. And I got an email that looked just like an Amazon order saying something wasn't being delivered due to the client credit card. I freaked out and clicked the email without even reading the rest of it, seeing that it was like Lee press-on nails and a Foreman grill, which I didn't order. If I read 2 lines down, I would have known. And I tell people that the fix, there's no technology that would have put it in the way. The fix for that would have been the education I give, which is slow down, read the email. Don't just click on the links. I could have opened my browser, went to my Amazon account, logged in, and checked my orders and see if there was any problem as opposed to clicking the link in the email. So I know it's a long-winded answer, but I feel that education is the only fix to social engineering. But when I say fix, I mean helping people fix it. I don't think there'll ever be a time where I can put a stamp on a human and say, you're now 100% social engineer free. You're hacker proof because you took this training. I don't think that there's any way to accomplish that. What do you think, HD?
I mean, there's a lot of ways to look at it. I kind of feel like we're moving towards kind of an island model versus an ocean model for the internet in general. We're having folks who are, mobile devices are being concentrated behind carrier net islands, in the sense of like, T-Mobile and AT&T and so on, all put their customers behind these various forms of indirectly accessible IP space. And they're all kind of reaching out to, central providers. So your Amazons, your Googles, your Microsofts. Essentially, we're moving from a model that was very peer-to-peer based to one that is very centralized, both on the client side and on the server side. And so I kind of feel like the solution to the social engineering issue is not going to be how do you train people to be more aware and slow down when they click things. It's to be getting rid of these vectors in the first place, like getting rid of email. So when you get a notification from Amazon, it doesn't go through email. It goes through some other notification channel you've set up directly between your client and Amazon as a central provider. moving to push messages as opposed to email and having push messages being verified by the source. So I feel like the only real solution to this stuff is to get around the kind of outdated communication mechanisms that have made this so easy in the past.
So that's a really interesting idea and concept. And although it sounds like great, like it would actually work, right? Like taking away email would have definitely decreased the amount of ability for people to phish and obviously get into an organization through phishing. But how realistic is it that we can do away with email earth-wide? We're talking in the methodology, the way we communicate. I don't know how many emails you get a day, but I probably get somewhere between 200 and 300 a day. And let's say 50% of them are things that I need.
I feel like we're already headed that direction. If you look at the way that most banks contact their customers, they really don't send email with any contents anymore. They basically say, don't trust email from us ever, because they've given up on the fact of being able to either convince people to vet the email properly or otherwise securing their channel. Instead of using things like applications, using text messages, which again are all spoofable, but at least it's something. So we are seeing, as kind of more of the internet commerce centralizes to a few major retailers, platforms, banks. We are seeing the communication methods starting to move outside of the kind of legacy stream.
Yet phishing emails that purport to be from banks still work so well.
They do, but I feel like if we got to the point that we can move away from email for most of the communication with entities that actually matter, like it doesn't matter if you click on a Match.com link and it's the wrong thing. It may be you personally, but it's probably not going to be as disproportionately bad to you as if you clicked on a phishing email for your bank. So I feel like if we start taking the things that are high risk, things like e-commerce, security, healthcare, banking, and moving them outside of email and moving to more direct communication streams, you may have a chance of protecting against these in the future.
Yeah, I think it sounds like an interesting concept to help, right? But then again, let me just play devil's advocate for a second. Like we also have this issue where I forget the statistics, so I'm probably misquoting, but it was some recent breach where they talked about when they analyzed some of the data, how 68 or 86, I might be mixing those numbers up, of the passwords were found to be reused. And then they did a survey where they asked people to come in anonymously and answer questions about how often they reuse passwords. And it was something like 82% of the people admitted to reusing passwords. So you're right. Maybe clicking on the Match.com email isn't as dangerous as clicking on a bank phish. But if 82% of those people are reusing the same password on Match.com, Amazon, bank, then gaining access to one account may allow the attacker to gain access to other information and other accounts that would then compromise or breach the company or the individual.
I mean, that'll make sense. I mean, even with two-factor, it doesn't protect against a machine that's been compromised, and you have malware that can do session writing in your browser, things like that. So obviously, there's no panacea for this stuff outside of just moving away from the technology in general that is problematic, and that's not going to happen anytime soon. Just chat about applications. If you look at mobile applications and how folks use them today, no one really seems to understand how bad the back end of these applications are, because at the end of the day, it's just a web server.
How is that not a thing that's antiquated by now? It seems like even software like 1Password makes a really cryptic one and then remembers it, and then you need like different types. I mean, why don't we have better authentication? It just seems really weird that my phone has better authentication than like my bank.
It's true. I mean, I've got video games that have stronger authentication than my bank.
Yeah.
I mean, if somebody were to try to log into my bank account, it looks all fancy because they like will text you that token or whatever, but it only does that one time. So what's the point of that? It should be two-factor. It should know my phone is with me, or it should say put your fingerprint on your phone or something like that, right, to log in. It just seems like that wouldn't even be hard. It doesn't even require new technology. It just requires technology to marry for the purposes of not losing all of the money that you have ever earned ever.
I had a bank quite a few years ago. We switched from this bank many, many years ago. And the login for the bank was my social security number.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually made an appointment with the head of their security department, went to the bank, told them I was closing all my accounts, and told them why. I said that this was ridiculous, that in the 2000s, that we were still dealing with a bank that allowed the social security number to be the login. Like, how insecure is that? Anyone's shoulder surfs, they're now getting my SSN. It's just a mess. It's just a mess to have that as your login. His argument was that the changing of the database was so costly, time-consuming, and difficult that the rollout would take years. It wasn't something they can just switch. And I was like, I don't even get that, because you're talking, what is it, a 9-digit code? Institute new 9-digit codes for logins. Nine-digit login codes, and you don't need to have it be the social security number. It's the thinking, right? So I think it's, like what HD is saying is, the technology is great, and the technology fixes will help us not be the low-hanging fruit. But it's also a changing of the thinking and the methodologies and the processes that if we don't update those too, we're still stuck in the quote-unquote technological dark ages.
Well, yeah, I'm sure Target thought, oh, there's no way we can fix this this huge problem. And then when they lost all of that valuation and had that huge problem, I mean, it didn't happen overnight, but it happened pretty quickly that thing got fixed.
Yeah, it was almost overnight.
Yeah.
It was almost overnight with them. So besides some changes of way we utilize antiquated tech, HD, what other things do you think could be done to not make us the low-hanging fruit?
I mean, the obvious one is, for me, like automatic NT1 authentication to UNC Pass is still what I, eat and breathe on pen tests. It just works so well. And no one, between lack of egress filtering at the gateways for port 445 and 139, and there being so many different ways to trigger UNC connections outbound from a client, at the end of the day, you end up with a password that even if you can't crack the clear text, you can crack the hash text through a DES attack. And at the end of the day, you still have a work-alike password basically for the user. So I feel like Microsoft changes with Windows 10 moving to VSM and protected processes for LSAS, that just kind of moves the ball around. It doesn't really fix the underlying problem, which is this automatic authentication built into Windows that continues to turn what would normally be a small breach into a big breach.
Because it seems like every time we turn around, whether you use Windows or you use Mac OS X, it seems like every day there's another news story about some other vulnerability that was found or some other method to bypass security. And then you couple that with, of course, focusing on the SE port, you couple that with either phishing or vishing or other types of attacks. And it seems like there's no way to keep ahead of the wave. It's like the wave's coming and there's no way to get ahead of it. And I think a lot of companies, especially maybe even smaller companies, feel that way, that there's no way to really kind of stay ahead to the point of where you're not going to drown. So, I mean, like Windows 10, that's great, but what is it that smaller companies or even larger companies can do without having to switch? Is there anything they can do? Maybe that's the better phrasing of that you see that could help them stay a little more secure.
I mean, the quick thing for most organizations is just add egress filtering. Like, first thing, it's going to break a lot of stuff. It's going to be really painful, but once you get through it, it's going to make any kind of breach response in the future much easier to deal with.
And how will egress filtering, will it affect, in your experience, anything to do with the social engineering vectors that come in?
It'll actually break a lot of the delivery paths for social engineering vectors, and it'll also break a lot of the egress paths as well for data once there isn't a breach. Obviously attackers can always find a way around that by mounting web dev shares or HTTPS and so on. But at least it's something. At least it buys you a little bit more time to detect the attack and respond.
Yeah, and I like that thinking because we always tell clients is that it's not about trying to find someone that can guarantee you that you'll never be hacked, because that's unrealistic. But if you can make yourself not the easy target, if you can make yourself not the simple just turn the doorknob and walk in, then maybe they'll go elsewhere to find someone easier, and you'll have a little extra time to shore things up, to fix whatever little dent came because they were banging on the wall. So we tell people, don't look at this as a surefire way. Like, there's no one thing that's going to fix it. That's why when you asked me before, I don't think education alone will fix the problem. I think you need a blend of what you're saying here with some of these changes to the methodologies and processes. You need technological fixes, and you need education. And together, that creates a secure environment as opposed to just relying on one of those things.
HD, I actually have a quick question that's more general in nature, but, within, I think, all of our lines of work, we provide services to clients, and the key point is that we have to think like the bad guys, but act like the good guys. And clearly, you're in that position as well. So can you comment briefly on this idea that we're always sort of one step behind the bad guys and what it sort of takes to be creatively thinking about solutions or trying to anticipate where they're going to go? Because I imagine you have to do a great deal of that in the type of work you do as well.
Oh, yeah, it's a great question. The challenge we run into with, yeah, I think calling us one step behind the bad guys is being a little too optimistic. I think we're probably 6 or 7. If you look at the complexity of exploits for client-side vectors, things like some of the Flash exploits going around recently, they're head and shoulders above what you'll see in kind of the open source exploit area. I mean, obviously, open source exploit development is improving. There's folks who are really good at it, folks who win all the various hackathons and Pwn contests and so on. But those types of exploits, at least at that level of complexity, are primarily coming out of black hats who are using these things in the wild these days. And the surprising part for me isn't that these things are complicated. It's that these are still the minimum necessary to compromise the target these folks have in mind. So for me, it's we like to think of all these creative ways to break into sites, to break into systems, to exploit different vulnerabilities. And at the end of the day, what matters isn't what we come up with; it's what people actually end up doing. So more recently, I've been spending a lot more of my time looking at actual attacks, looking at methodologies of attackers, and they're pretty different from what we do on the pentest side. The way that a pentest will tackle a particular organization or vector would be very different from the way a real attacker does. I feel like we need to start closing those gaps so that folks can actually defend against what will hit them in the future, not necessarily the kind of more white glove approach that pen testers take.
How do you do that? How do you make that change? Like, what is it that you do to not take that approach?
I mean, the hard one that everyone in this industry knows is scope is always a problem. Black hats don't have scope. Black hats have the internet and they've got exploits and they have fun. We have scope. If we're doing work for a customer, we can't target all the vendors. You can't go after the HVAC vendor, for example, of our company without them also signing on to an agreement. There's gaps in the third parties and trust relationships that either we're not aware of or that we're not allowed to test as part of the scope, either from a cost perspective or just from a legal perspective. And those blind spots end up being the most common ways into organizations because you can't test them, and there's resistance to testing them in the future. As far as going beyond that, I think what we see is the attacks that are the most successful tend to be the most simple. You don't see these crazy, multi-step ROP attacks being used against your everyday enterprise. We see them being used against very specific targets. But what do you see working against large enterprises are the same things that have always worked. An EHC attachment with a different password in a zip file, or a different way of embedding an executable into another document format. Just slight variations of what's already been out there for 10 years.
And so again, it's not really necessary to have a fancy attack if the most simple kinds of way in still work.
Exactly. And that's depressing for me on an exploit development side because I always like to have, the shiniest tools and the latest thing out there.
Right.
At the end of the day, those techniques aren't what people are using.
And I think your points about scope are critical in that in terms of what it limits us to as white hat penetration testers and the rules of engagement, rules of ethical engagement, what we are allowed to do versus what we would like to do or what is inadvisable to do, just from the basis of alienating the clients and the employees and losing learning moments from our perspective.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I've worked on teams before where you'll see one member of the team get a little bit closer to that sociopath line because they have to. If you look at the types of attacks that the company's defending against, there isn't a lot of emotional coddling happening. People are being rude, they're being mean, they're calling and demanding things, they're trying to create senses of urgency, trying to trigger panics. They're doing things that most employees would sue their employer over if it happened during the line of work. And so as a result, the white hat folks have to figure out how far down the path do we go, what's accessible, what's not accessible. Obviously, on the social engineering side, that's a much bigger issue.
Yeah, for us at least, it's always a risk of how to really handle that 100% because at the end of the day, even if we can think like the bad guy, for us, it's one of those things where you don't want to leave people feeling damaged or psychologically marred because of your test, because that's not going to win anybody over to thinking that security is something they need to take. They're gonna look at security and, start shaking and crying because of what happened to them. So it's always a difficult balance, I think, with those things.
I mean, even without social engineering, we've had administrators, not in my current role or current organization, but in the past, I've worked on penetration tests where the sysadmin has literally quit in the middle of the pen test and walked out the door.
Wow.
And that was the last I saw him because he was aware of how bad the test was going, took it very personally, given him a chance to talk about it, and walked out the door before anyone could stop him. So those things happen, and it's even worse with social engineering. People take this stuff pretty personally.
When you see that, do you think that that is fixable by the consultant, by the pen tester, to maybe the way that they handled it or communicated it? Or do you think that that's a internal communications issue for the company, or is that a personal issue for that particular guy?
It's probably a mix of all three, but if someone's at the point that they're willing to walk out the door during a test that they thought, was authorized and was supposed to help them, there's definitely dysfunction within the organization and possibly some, personal issues as well.
Yeah, because we haven't had that happen yet, but I have seen people really, really get upset. I mean, like you said, especially with the SE vectors, to the point of where they really are almost, to use the word, hateful, towards us. And there's like nothing you can do to make it better. They want you dead because of what you did. And that's a difficult, you lose any effective ability to teach at that point or to use it as a learning lesson because the emotion is so negative and so strong.
And it kind of goes against kind of basic human nature too. You don't want to be a jerk to your, fellow man, or it comes off as, betraying someone's trust and, implicit trust is just being a regular human. And, I've got folks who just can't do social engineering because they can't do that. They're too upfront about it. They feel too guilty, even lying for the purpose of doing a social engineering test.
Yeah, we get that a lot with people. It's a different kind of feel to really think through that and to you kind of have to tell yourself, I think what Michelle said is like our mantra here is, think like the bad guy, but remember you're the good guy. And you got to constantly tell yourself that you don't ever step over that line, that really thin line that takes you to the dark side and makes you forget that you're actually supposed to be helping people. Let's talk about like SE and then Metasploit, because at least for us, especially previously when I was more involved in network pen testing, not just SE pen testing, Metasploit was of course used all the time, especially the payloads there. And I'm sure over the past few years, you probably have helped enhance the exploit database in Metasploit to be way more vast than it was just even a couple years ago. So what kind of useful payloads are now available for social engineering in Metasploit?
The community's been really awesome. Just looking at exploits alone, we've gone from, I think, 150 exploits in 2005 for Metasploit 3 to something around 1,200 plus these days, not including the auxiliary modules and the payloads. So, that's all the community pitching in and helping out. So it's a great team to work with, both the folks internal to Rap7 and external that we work with in the community. Talking about payloads specifically, we've been doing a lot of work lately to kind of bring all of the interpreter payloads into line, both, making the ones that are a little bit less well-maintained, more maintained, simplifying code bases, consolidating feature sets. There's a ton of documentation now available in the interpreter wiki page on the GitHub portal for Metasploit framework. But we've done a ton of work, both increasing transports and reliability. So adding the ability to have a payload connect back to different URLs, to different transports, and fall back automatically when one connection dies. So if you have your laptop and you open a social engineering email and it has the new interpreter baked into it, it'll try connecting out through TCP. For some reason that doesn't work. It'll flip back to HTTP. If that doesn't work, to HTTPS. You can find a list of URLs and list of endpoints to kind of flip-flop through until it finds one that'll get out for your particular firewall. And if you close your laptop lid and take it to Starbucks a day and a half later and pop it open, it'll jump back up and open your session again. So we've done a lot of work making sessions reliable and automatically reopening in the case of shutdowns or failures. Kind of going beyond that a bit, we spent a lot of time looking at not really the evasiveness or security of it, but adding some ability to have confidence that your payload is the one that you actually put there and being able to identify which payload was on what machine. So you have the ability to embed unique IDs within the payloads themselves, both the stager and the stageless modes, so that when you get a callback from a payload, you know exactly which executable and which target you sent it to in the first place. You can also name those. You can copy the database of UIDs between machines, and you can also enable SSL verification where it actually pins the SHA-1 hash of the SSL cert of the Metasploit listener directly into the payload, and it won't connect back unless the SHA-1 hash matches. So that's a great way to frustrate your blue team.
Yeah, and I got to tell you right there, that one feature you just said to me is so needed. So being able to put like a UID on your actual exploit. So when I send it, I'm sure you've done this. We've all done this in pen test. You send out 10, 20, 30, 50, whatever exploits all at the same time. You start getting shells back in. It's hard to determine without grabbing an IP address and then later on matching that IP address to which machine. This is all back in the day. Right now, putting a UID on it, I know exactly which person opened that exploit, which machine that exploit was sent to, and I can label them properly. To me, that is kind of like what has happened in the phishing world. So when you're doing education for phishing, being able to label things, we know that, HD is the one who clicked this email. Jordan's the one who clicked this one. Michelle didn't fall for it or click at all. We know that because of being able to attach that UID. What a beneficial feature for the professional, being able to now assist the company in saying we know exactly who did what and when it was done and all that kind of stuff.
It's working really well now. One thing that's still missing is the ability to automatically embed UIDs in multi-target exploits like client-side exploits like Flash and Java and so on. One of my coworkers, Wei Chen, is working on a rewrite of the browser autopone module. And as part of that, we're looking into ways to take advantage of the UID stuff and, implement universal listeners and things like that directly into that module as well. It's still a work in progress, but so we have some code branches that are currently open at the moment and looking for feedback on some of them. One real neat feature of the UID stuff is the ability to whitelist it. So you can say, only connect back to my listener with this SSL cert. And on the listener side, you can say, only allow payloads that I know about to connect back in. So, for example, you can say you can put a listener on port 80 or 443 that's exposed to the internet and ignore all the trash requests that come in and only allow requests from the customer you're currently testing.
Wow. Okay, so mix that. And how did you make, I'm not looking for the technical because it'll be over my head anyway, but thinking about persistent shell, because that was always a problem, right? If you get the shell and then the person decides to close their laptop, decides to log off for the night, you're done. So you have that, if you don't move the instance to another PID, within the machine to another process, then you're screwed. But now you're saying that you have an exploit that even if they close their laptop, take it home or take it to Starbucks, when they boot back up, it's going to automatically be persistent and log back into your shell?
I'm sorry, I misspoke. There's two kinds of persistence we're referring to. One is, let's say you've got a TCP-based payload like Meterpreter with reverse TCP. Previously, if that connection closed, you lost your session forever.
Yeah.
Now what happens is that session will try to reconnect back as many times as needed, or I'll switch to the next transport that you've added. And so even if someone closes the laptop lid and suspends, the connection is broken, they move somewhere else, as long as your listener is still running, it'll pop back up and reconnect. Going the next step further to actually doing system-level persistence, that's something we try to stay away from on the Metasploit side. Just like AV evasion, we feel like there's people out there who spend a lot more time doing AV evasion than we do. We don't feel like it's really our job on the open source side. We do offer some, evasive capabilities on the commercial side, but for open source, we point people to things like Veil framework, other ways to embed the payload into other targets, PowerShell, for example, PowerShell encoding. There's been some fun work recently about using PowerShell persistence through the registry. So essentially you do a start key that runs PowerShell that pulls the payload out of another registry key in encoded form and then runs it automatically. So essentially you can have an entire payload just resident within memory, within the registry itself, never touching the disk.
And all of these could be embedded in some kind of PDF or other type of file type that would be used to send as an SE exploit?
Oh, totally. I mean, the only thing we care about on the Metasploit side is providing the actual payloads, the features within the interpreter itself, the exploit delivery paths, everything beyond that in terms of how you embed it, how you encode it, how you make it persistent. We feel like that is better solved by the community, and it's going to constantly evolve to match what attackers do anyways.
Yeah, I can't argue with that. That's truly amazing. That was a brainful right there.
Yeah, absolutely.
I had to pause for a second and okay, hang on. Do I have an actual intelligent question or do I drool on myself right now? What do I do?
A small note on that: we're trying to combine the right now. Windows Meterpreter has been the payload that most people use within Metasploit. We're trying to expand that to cover most POSIX systems. So we actually have a Meterpreter that's compatible with ARM embedded devices, MIPS embedded devices. You can run on almost any type of hardware and cross compiles directly from the source tree. So that's an effort that's currently in progress. It's going pretty well. We've also combined the Android and the Java payloads a little bit better, and we're in the middle of reworking the Android payloads now and mobile payloads in general to be much more effective and have the same features as the Windows Meterpreter where possible.
Yeah, I would imagine with the advent of BYOD that any type of mobile device exploit is probably very heavily used and appreciated by pen testers.
I mean, the thing about mobile device exploits is generally targeting a mobile device is difficult unless you can get them to visit a website or click on a link. You don't really have much opportunity to attack the target in the first place. However, when you're on a local network like Starbucks Wi-Fi or something like that, you can take advantage of so many different vulnerabilities in the platform. Everything from the Samsung IME keyboard vulnerability recently that you can man in the middle and use that to run arbitrary code. All the Android WebView stuff is just horrific. Any system before, I believe 4.4.0, we'll never get a WebView security update, and will be permanently exploitable going, all the way back to the past of, 2.3 or 2.1 or whatever it is that it was introduced. So we feel like that the current Android market, everything below 4.4 is kind of permanently exploitable no matter where you are, and many of those devices will never have updates. So we feel that market is, that particular target group is worth building tools around because there is no way to fix it.
And not only that, but people, at least in this country, we're not so prevalent on upgrading soon as something comes out. I mean, I don't know about you, but I know a lot of people, myself included, that have kept phones for 2 or 3 years. As a matter of fact, I had to force Michelle to upgrade her phone because it was like so thick that she couldn't even carry it in her purse. I think it was like 7.5 inches thick and had an actual pull-out keyboard that was a full-size keyboard.
It was a good bludgeoning device. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I mean, it was a bludgeoning device because it weighed like 16 pounds, This is why she has back problems carrying that thing around. So we had to force her to upgrade it, and then finally got him something new. But I would imagine that's more common where people keep their devices, they're working, they have them, and especially in the last couple of years, let's say a few years when the economy wasn't that great, people weren't spending money. So now you have BYOD, and then you have all these ancient devices, like you just said, that are going to be permanently exploitable, all coming into networks to a company near you.
And, on some regards, Apple does a better job than Android just because of the less fragmentation. But at the same time, if you look at, older systems like the Apple 3GS phone or anything below that, support for the latest iOS versions is crummy at best. Like if you upgrade, things get really sluggish, they're slow. They're just not really designed for the hardware. So even if there is an upgrade available from the vendor, people won't apply it for a bunch of reasons. I mean, laziness is one of them. You just don't want to go through having it possibly break all your stuff. But also, it may work less well. I mean, these vendors sell these devices. They make money selling new devices, not maintaining old ones.
No, and that's a really smart point. When we get updates on our machines and our systems that we use, we always wait to go look and see what's out there. Like, so let other people install it. And then you see people coming back saying, oh my gosh, it broke this, it broke that, mail doesn't work, this doesn't work. We wait until those things get ironed out, and then we do it. And there's a pro and con to that. The pro is we're not dealing with the problems everyone else is, but the con is if it was a security update, you may be vulnerable for a period of time while you're waiting for that crap to get fixed.
Yeah, there's one silver lining at least. With the later versions of Android, they've broken out some of the system components from OS and made them independently updatable applications. So the WebView component, the actual HTML renderer that tends to get exploited, they actually pulled out from the OS itself and maintain it separately as a package now. So it does get updates, even if the vendors don't provide updated OSs. And I feel like that kind of model of, kind of microservices and system services and applications really is the only thing Google could have done to get a handle on the fragmentation problem. So hopefully things will get better. Obviously, it doesn't fix kernel exploits because those still require OS updates, but it's something at least.
In like 50 some minutes, you've given us like so much to think about. I think my brain hurts a little.
Yeah, I'll admit I didn't understand most of what we talked about, which is why I was quiet.
I know, that's the funny part. That's really excellent, though. I mean, I'm still fascinated by this concept of encouraging companies to get away from email as a form of communication within vendors and things like that. As interesting as it sounds, I have such a hard time believing that we'll ever see it occur.
I think there's ways to get there, though. Like if you took all the email that is verified from your company, from your company's mail servers, and you put it in one bucket and everything else in a different bucket, that would still help with a whole lot of the social engineering attacks we see. Anything targeted as coming from a coworker and so on wouldn't show up in the right box. So I think there are some minimal steps we can do to start segmenting off email that we actually care about in this incoming streams from, kind of the trash that shows up in our inboxes because we registered for various events.
Yeah, that's a good point. And how would they, what would be your suggestion, an internal company? Like, how does a company communicate internally if they're not using email?
Scribes.
Scribes work. One way to, fairly simple, kind of annoying way to do it still is rolling out S-MIME. At least then, if there's not a valid signature from a coworker's address, that something went wrong. I mean, S-MIME's not a panacea. It has its downsides even compared against GPG. But it's something at least. It at least tells you that, hey, my coworker probably sent this from their machine. It didn't come from outside the company. Most companies are really bad about flagging email that came from external that purports to be from a coworker. That's just an issue on the social sharing front that many people struggle with, especially as companies expand and they get more sites and they outsource more of their email.
What about like Slack and HipChat and internal communication? Is that just not scalable enough right now for bigger companies? Because it seems dumb almost to have email inside a company when there's just far superior messaging systems in place with a lot of smaller businesses too now.
That's a good point. I mean, I feel like a lot of the messaging services out there, like if you look at the way that Microsoft tackled Skype and MSN, is they're basically rolling Microsoft Messenger into Skype itself. Skype replaces both Link for businesses for chatting, has now replaced business chat as well. So we are seeing more consolidation in the corporate and enterprise space for communication tools like Slack, like Skype, like FlowDoc, things like that. I mean, there's still some challenges because one, these things are all hosted externally. So if Slack gets breached again and it's worse than last time, arguably all your messages may be exposed. And depending on what people chat about, they may be more free about what they talk about in chat than they would be in email. So, the number of passwords and temporary tokens, things like that, may be higher in those communication mechanisms than they would be in something like email.
And that's always our concern. When clients ask us, is they'll say things like, well, what about using something like Skype? And it is externally hosted. And can you trust it? Can you trust that it's either not being listened in on, or it's not going to, like you said, what happens if it gets breached? What kind of information do you put there? What will be out there? I mean, almost as worse as being breached is, as bad as being breached is, the follow-up embarrassment of what happens to your company and your clients and all of that is just as bad as being breached, it seems. I think that's the big scare for people. Can we trust these third parties? And it's not so easy to set up an internal just for your own company. That's not necessarily an easy thing to do.
I mean, you kind of hit it dead on. We're all too interconnected these days for any single breach of any of our partners to be a safe thing for us to basically say, okay, that didn't affect me. These days, no matter which of your vendors, which of your partners, which of your providers gets breached, they probably have enough information that it makes you look bad, even if it doesn't affect your operations.
Yeah. So we got a lot to think about. There's a ton you gave us here to actually ponder on. I think this will be something a lot of people like to listen to. Let me just see if ask you a couple last questions. What's next? What's next for Metasploit? Anything new and exciting you could talk about that we can look forward to?
Sure. So I split my time these days between research that I work on a bunch of projects, Rapid7, most prominent is probably Project Sonar. And then on the Metasploit side, I work on everything from payloads to daily bug fixes to exploits. Just I have fun using it, writing it, working on it. So technically not in an apartment anymore, but I spend probably half my time on it anyways, free time and otherwise. On the Metasploit side, we're doing a lot of fun things around browser exploitation right now. There's a lot of rework in process. We're looking at targeting mobile a little bit better, just because we're seeing mobile devices becoming more frequently used for business. Overall, we generally kind of follow the zeitgeist of kind of where things are going. If our community starts submitting modules for some particular technology stack that becomes popular, we'll start supporting it and going down the path of getting it to be the best tool available for testing that. Talking more specifically about research projects, I've been working on Project Sonar now for probably, I think, just about 2 years, maybe just under 2 years now. We've been publishing data directly to scans.io pretty much since day one. What we've done that's made it somewhat interesting is we've started creating this kind of archive of what's on the internet and when it was on the internet. So just like archive.org covers all the content for what a particular website said at a given time and date, we tell you what ports were open, what DNS name was associated with what IP address, what SL certificate was associated with what IP address as well. And that information is becoming really useful in a historical retrospect. Not only is it useful for things like, discovery during social engineering engagements, where you can go find all the assets for a particular company really easily without doing any active work whatsoever. You can also use it to figure out, okay, was this company breached in the past? Were any of the IPs at this company hosting an SL cert that would indicate this particular vulnerability, either a static SSL key or tied to a particular command and control server? So we are seeing projects like Sonar, projects like Shodan, other efforts by University of Michigan and other folks who are doing these internet-wide scanning projects. They're contributing to kind of this archive of what the internet's made of, kind of the internet's backbone, if not the internet's meat, if you will. And that information is becoming really valuable in retrospect, both for breaches and for reconnaissance.
Now, and just for the listeners who might not know what it is, because I remember when you introduced Sonar, just explain what is it? What is Sonar? What is it that you did?
All we do is annoy admins, unfortunately. We're trying to find better ways to do that, but essentially we scan the internet for 14 common UDP services and about 4 or 5 TCP services today, with plans to expand that out a little bit. And we look for things like, is NetBIOS open? Do you have the VxWorks debug port open to the internet? Things like UPnP, NatPnP, other kind of home router communication protocols that are exposed.
You skipped over the part that I think people won't get is you scan the internet. So we're not talking about you scan a little bit of it. You scanned the whole internet.
That's true. Every 3 hours, we cover the entire IPv4 space, all 3.7 billion IPs.
Right.
And we upload that data directly to university-hosted servers, and we share the data publicly.
Right. So, I remember when you announced this at Black Hat, I think it was Derby, right?
Oh, yeah, Derby.
Derby. I remember that speech at Derby when you announced this project, and it was like, what? You're scanning the whole internet? What are you talking about? It doesn't even make sense. And now you're doing it every 3 hours.
And the data that's coming out of it has been super useful for both researchers trying to figure out what's actually out there, what's exposed, all the way to people doing reconnaissance, social engineering, both for their own companies and for their customers. There's different portals that are being stood up these days to provide searchable access to this data. You're welcome to just go download the raw data and build it yourself, like toss into Elasticsearch or just grep it. I run a pretty big cluster at home just to be able to play with the data here.
But okay, when you're talking about grepping the data that you got from scanning the whole internet, just give us like a rough estimate. How many, like what size are we talking about here for a file containing that scan?
So for DNS, we do reverse DNS lookup of every IP directly. We don't do like tree walking. We actually do direct lookups against all, 4-ish billion, or 3.7 billion. And we get back about 1.2 billion records each time. And you can grep that with, just a normal Linux box, 8 gigs of RAM. You can grep it in a couple of minutes for a particular set of names. It's really not that much work. Things like 4 DNS lookups, where we actually take a ton of inputs and we use that to do 4 DNS lookups across every domain. That comes out to be about 8 billion inputs, returns around 1.4 billion outputs. And again, it's pretty easy to grab. The bigger ones are things like HTTP, where we do a full HTTP GET request to every IP with port 80 open. And that comes out to about 70 gigabytes compressed, which is a lot more than that uncompressed. And that does take a lot longer to grab, but it's not hard to build systems for this. We have some guidelines on the wiki page for Sonar about kind of how to process data and kind of do things with it at scale. But yeah, it's fun to use, and you can do a lot of cool research on it. Both figuring out, okay, what is the most exposed vector out there that no one's really targeting? Kind of what's the next attack going to use, because what's the most exposed thing that's out there? A good example of that would be NatPnP. No one cares about NatPnP. It is the most overlooked protocol known to man. There's 1 million plus devices on the internet right now. You can cause to make arbitrary port forwards to other external systems from them. So if I want to host malware on some random broadband user's home machine with NatPnP open, I can forward any incoming packet on port 80 to that machine, to a machine that I control, and use him as basically a stooge to host malware, to host spam sites, whatever. And there's a million IPs out there, and they keep getting more. Now it's 1.2 million and 1.3 million. The number keeps going up. It's one of the few vectors that we measure as part of Project Sonar that continues getting worse every single month, and no one seems to care about.
And what device or what software is opening that port?
It's a mix. The biggest offender is a open source software package called Mini UPnPD, and the developer's really nice. He meant well, but there's a bug in one version of it where the software would accidentally bind to the external interface as well as the internal interface.
Wow.
And the way the software works, it trusts the source IP of the packets, and the packets are UDP. So you spoof a packet from your destination to the proxy, and then it creates a mapping back to you. Anyway, so there's fun things you can do there, and the challenge is the developer fixed this bug. All the folks who package the software are all the major, router, broadband, WAP, smart TV vendors. They all take the same software and package it up. Unfortunately, they're still shipping old versions of it, and we've actually seen, in some cases, like the UPnP SSDP buffer overflows that we found, a few years back, I think 2012, both in libUPnP and mini UPnP, 2 stack overflows are actually gotten worse over time. We've seen the number of exploitable devices kind of ramp down from 80% to 90% down to about 25%, and then shoot back up to 40% again as of this year, as different broadband ISPs roll out new equipment that still has old vulnerabilities.
Wow. I mean, that's kind of shocking to me, right? We're talking, like, you're not talking about something that you found 5 years ago. You're talking about something you're finding now.
Even stuff we found 5 years ago doesn't really go away. We found the VxWorks, backdoor debug port, for example. You can dump memory, read and write code in memory. You can run arbitrary, processes, whatever you want. We went from about 300,000 devices exposed to the internet to about 55,000 to 60,000, and it's kind of stayed right around between 55 and 60,000 for the last 2 years. These things never die.
So here's what I'm still trying to wrap my head around is that HD says that he downloads this so he can play with this stuff at home.
Yeah.
My wife is very nice.
He probably gathers the kids around and shows them, here's how you grep 1.7 billion lines, kids.
This is family game night, yes.
Yeah, whoever can grep fastest gets candy. Yeah, I miss working with you, HD. I tell you, just hearing things like, download 70 gig file and grep it, it's not that hard. You know, I miss those statements. I miss
that faster, man.
Yeah.
Relatively.
I know this is probably a silly question, but just really kind of thinking about this. Where do you get the bandwidth to scan the whole internet every 3 hours?
I'll say it's not bad. We have a single 1 gig pipe that we use, an ISP that we've worked with for years that was actually the original host for Metasploit.com back in 2004. It's the same ISP we scan from these days for Project Sonar.
Oh, really? And they don't care. They just they don't mind the bandwidth.
They care, but the bandwidth, we pay for the bandwidth, pay for the switches, pay for the servers. They really care about, offending their customers, getting blacklisted, all that fun stuff. We work with our abuse team daily. We address complaints from all across the board, from governments to small businesses to spooks and crazies, all alike. I mean, we get all sorts of bizarre responses to our scanning, but they've been pretty upfront about it. They understand the value of the data and why we're doing it, and that we're not trying to be jerks, that we're actually trying to help, protect the internet and identify exposures before they get exploited. And we've seen some success with that in the past. I do feel like most public examples at this point are a little depressing to look at, but there have been some success cases where we're able to notify, a government agency that, hey, we found these things exposed, and they're able to fix them before someone popped all their servers.
Oh, that's awesome then. So you have like actionable proof of why this data is so useful and why it's important to continue doing it.
Absolutely. Just from the reconnaissance standpoint, like if we're trying to figure out what assets that, a particular organization has, you generally find 10% more assets using the sonar data than you do using anything else. Because we find stuff that it's really hard to relate back to the company using any of the standard IT tools. For example, if you have a consultant who starts up and they go to Linode or DigitalOcean and they create a new node with reverse DNS mapping to your domain name, but they never tell you about it. It's on a company credit card. It's ticking away in the background. Your IT is completely in the dark about it. It'll be in Sonar. Because we'll find it based on the reverse DNS name, the forward DNS name, SSL certificate name, any of the subject alt certs. If one of your employees sets up a Cloudflare site for a subdomain, that name will be exposed in that SSL cert. We'll grab that in Sonar. That'll be published in both our SSL database and our FDNS database. So the amount of different ways that we can identify assets in Sonar has been really helpful for especially large enterprises trying to get a handle on all their external assets out there, especially ones our IT folks don't know about.
So you even, obviously, if I missed this, I'm sorry. Are you scanning for things like SNMP and things like that?
SNMP is a tricky one because there's a lot of hardware out there that triggers SNMP traps when it gets the wrong community name. So instead of I set a code for public, your power distribution unit is set up for some magic hard to guess string instead. It says, hey, I got a community that I didn't recognize. It sends an SNMP trap. That goes out to a pager pool. That wakes up a whole lot of admins who are very unhappy.
Yeah. Yeah. Then you get more complaints. Yeah. I'm thinking from an SE angle, like SNMP, of course, it tells you so much about every computer and what's on it and the software and all of that stuff that it's just, it would be a treasure trove in a pen test. But yeah, I see your point.
We did a scan of that as part of a previous project called Critical IO. That data is also available on scans.io. It just hasn't been updated since 2012 or 2013. That data does include SNMP, and it was a bloodbath. I mean, there's something like 15,000 routers you can trivially compromise through writable SNMP strings, like Cisco routers that you just rewrite the configuration on the fly as a result. There are just so many issues out there. I mean, the fact that SNMP public was exposed on some Windows servers ended up leaking the process name arguments, which often contain database passwords, encryption keys, API tokens, SQL Server passwords, you name it. So SNMP is generally overlooked by the public, but there is so much terribleness that's in SNMP is not even funny.
So it's probably responsible disclosure part, right? You do that, and you're probably just asking for all those companies to be compromised almost.
Well, I mean, it's good to know about it versus not know about it. It's just a challenge. How do you address at that point? I mean, it's a configuration issue when it comes down to it. Change your default community string. It's not that hard.
Right. Yeah.
But there are some challenges out there. Like most printers, people don't bother with them. They don't even realize SNMP is exposed. And printers, for the most part, they get overlooked in a lot of ways, but they can have things like your AD credentials actually stored on the printer for scan privileges. You'll see things like the ability to list previous print jobs by name. So you'll say, hey, look, why did this person go print out a resume yesterday? So there is some sensitive stuff that gets exposed through SNMP on a lot of printers out there that folks just aren't aware of.
Yeah, I mean, I'm constantly amazed at how like whole countries, let's say like in the, not naming any, but like in the Middle East, that will have SNMP open on an amazing amount of computers, and the amount of data that it will release. I mean, more than just the printers, like you're saying. I mean, we're network shares and drives and particular software and versions and security patches and the OS is everything under the sun, and it's just like an open door to what you would do next with Metasploit, let's say.
The worst case I saw was a CALIA system, a lawful intercept system, set up outside the U.S. that had SNP public setup on it, and enumerated all the active collection jobs through SNP arguments.
Oh, no.
It was ridiculous. So that was probably the worst case scenario I saw so far in terms of SNP data leaks. But you're right, it's a bloodbath, and especially if you look overseas where folks use cheaper routers, like a lot of these ZTE and Huawei routers, at least in the past, I'm not sure about now, tended to ship with SNP default on. And the majority of the devices SNP exposed are still in countries like Brazil and China and Russia. Yeah. Just kind of a small tangent on this. Most UDP services that we scan within Sonar can be used for reflective DDoS. So everything from, we saw NTP being used for DDoS amplification attacks a couple years ago, or I guess a year and a half ago. Then folks moved on to SSDP, which is part of UPnP right afterwards. But there's like 30 more out there. I mean, we see Shadow servers doing a great job of scanning and identifying these, but folks complain about these UDP reflective DDoS attacks, but they're not really doing much to stop it. There was a concerted effort to fix a lot of the NTP monolith stuff that was out there at the time when folks finally got off their butts and started blocking those down. But there hasn't been a similar effort to do things like block SSDP or NatPNP or these dozens of other UDP protocols that can be used for DDoS as well.
Yeah, it's got to be mind-numbing, I guess, from that angle too. Like nothing on the version of what you're talking about here with the amount of data. But I know for me, sometimes you got to remind yourself that you're there to do good, because it can get depressing when you constantly see, like from my angle, the human vulnerabilities that just continue to exist regardless of education, regardless of the news stories, regardless of what's out there. So for you, it must be even worse. Like you do these scans and you go, wait, just last month it was only 1 million computers. Now it's 1.5 million computers that are vulnerable. It's got to be a little depressing to constantly see that.
But it's a mountain to climb, but we've got to get through it one way or another.
Yeah, it's useful data. I mean, probably really useful for researchers, useful for the security industry, useful for companies to see. Hopefully, those who are using that have their eyes opened and will make some positive changes. Hopefully, right? That's all we can hope for.
Well, I mean, I look at these kind of internet-wide scanning projects just like I looked at Metasploit a few years ago, I guess 15 years ago. It's something a lot of people are uncomfortable with. The fact that, hey, there's random people scanning me, like it's kind of the not in my backyard approach to internet security. Uh-huh. You don't want stuff about your company being online, but you do want to know what everyone else has. Right. But it doesn't really work that way. You have to kind of level the playing field. You have to share this data. You have to get it out there. You have to be able to reference, say, look how bad all this stuff is. We should do something about it. We're in that data set too. And this, we get a lot of knee-jerk responses by security departments saying, stop scanning our networks. I'm like, okay, great. But we're like one of 20 projects to do this. And it's actually, we're the most transparent about what we do. So it may not help you for us. And we have had folks come back and say, keep scanning us and let us know if you find anything, or give us some pointers on how to pull the data down and work with it ourselves. So we do find some reasonable folks on the IT side that see this as a boon, but oftentimes we see this kind of not in my backyard approach of scanning. And previously we saw the same thing around exploit development. People wanted to know whether an exploit was available, but they didn't want bad guys to have them. So you have to go one way or another, right? And we're pushing pretty hard now to make sure that types of things that we do for research are still considered above board, and we're being very transparent about it. And it's a huge pain in my ass. But at the same time, we are trying to make things better, and we're trying to make sure that people see us as someone who's helping them out, not someone trying to bludgeon them over the head with their tools.
And that's a good point. We feel get the same kind of kickback sometimes with the SECTF, and we have those companies that will call us after and go, man, thanks for using us. Can you let us know what you found? And we'll meet with them and tell them everything that happened and give them all the details. And then you have some who are like, well, we were happy the first 5 years you issued the report, but we're really ticked that you use us this year. So, kind of thing. And it's those companies who come and say, hey, I'd like to know, what did you find and what can we do to fix it? Those are the ones who generally you see, every year improving, hopefully. Those guys who really take that time to use the data efficiently, at least in our case. A little bit smaller subset though than yours.
We'll get there. I mean, I feel like the kind of tone of the internet is finally, the tone of security administrators is starting to warm up a little bit to more of these techniques, more of this data being available. So I feel like we're getting there, but it's a long haul. I mean, it took Metasploit 5 or 6 years before people stopped calling my head every day.
Yeah.
It picked up again recently, but it's it is what it is.
No, I'm with you. Yeah, it does seem like the attitude has shifted in the last 2 or 3 years over what it used to be like 10 years ago or so. So yeah, it's positive. So one of the things we always ask when we have someone on the podcast is we have a lot of people who like to read. Now, I'm not sure in your spare time from grepping, 70 gig files, if you actually spend any time with books at all. But do you have any books you'd recommend at all? We don't care what they're about, but it's always a question we ask everybody that comes on the show.
Oh, sure. I read tons of trashy sci-fi, basically. I read some good sci-fi too, but mostly really trashy stuff. So the most recent book that I started reading, I'm almost finished, I guess, last night, was the last of the, and it's not the trashy category. I actually like the author a lot. Charles Stross writes a series called The Laundry Files, and his most recent book came out yesterday, I believe, on digital. And it's Annihilation Store, something like that. Annihilation Score. Anyhow, it's a great book, but I read a lot of Charles Stross, a lot of the late Ian M. Banks. I read all the Pratchetts. I read tons of sci-fi, basically. And occasionally I read real books too, but that's usually how I go to sleep.
Man, that's crazy. So, I always picture someone as busy as you and doing as much as you do, not really having time to read entertainment books. So you just I'm going to set up a little idol for you here and maybe auto it or something. I'm not sure.
This is entertainment because these are inspiration for the next version of Metasploit, right? So
So sci-fi, whatever we see coming up in the next Metasploit came from one of the sci-fi books.
It's definitely influenced by it.
That's great. Okay, awesome. So now we know. That's perfect. Obviously, too, if people want to know more about you and not take your head off, but actually look into more about your projects, where can they go to find out things about you and what you're doing right now?
If you just Google Project Sonar, you'll find all the stuff we're doing on the scanning side. And if you go to scans.io, it's a website hosted by the University of Michigan, and they do a lot of really cool work. Nearly every major SSL bug they've had some relation to, either on finding it or documenting or measuring it. So really sharp team at University of Michigan. But scans.io, you can find a list of all the kind of data sets we publish there. Otherwise, I spend almost all my time on Metasploit. You can find a list of my projects at hdm.io because I'm lazy and don't like to type a lot. And that's probably it.
Awesome. Man, hey, it took us 70 months to get you on the podcast, but it was well worth it.
Sorry for taking so long to get on.
No, we're all busy and it was actually good timing. I mean, there's so much going on right now in the world, and with this scanning project, it was just a fascinating conversation. So I'm really happy we made it happen. Will we see you out at Derby this year, you think, or?
Derby, yes. DEF CON, no. So I'm hiding from conferences for a little bit longer. I'm on a 1.5-year sabbatical now from any speaking whatsoever, and it's been awesome.
And when you make your great entrance again, it's going to probably be something pretty awesome. So,
again, what do you mean? I think I'm done. This is great.
Well, sabbaticals usually end, so I just figured it's gonna, you'll probably end it at some point.
Every day I don't speak is a blessing at this point. So,
well, not for the world, but I understand where you're coming from. So
I figure these days, it's one of the reasons why I don't really get on podcasts much either. Is I feel like the information density is kind of tough on podcasts. They're great when you're doing other things, but they're difficult to really take notes and read and go into more detail on. So I'm trying to focus more on actual research projects, on documentation, on writing more code. And as far as talking about it, maybe once in a while at cons in the future, but I feel like I should be doing more things versus talking about them.
Yeah, I get that. That's good. At least with the podcast, at least to give you a little encouragement, I know that there's been multiple ones in the past where we've had people who've developed tools or had some new methodology for OSINT or something like that, and people will say that they have listened to it while they were driving in and out of work, but then they would re-listen to it later on when they were at the desk, so they could take notes or go to the website or try things that were being talked about in the podcast. So. I'm sure with something like this, with all the different scan sites and the things you talked about, people will be applying it that way because there's a ton of information here in this.
That's great to hear.
Yeah. It was great having you on, HD. I really appreciate it.
All right, thanks, Chris, Michelle, Jordan. Appreciate the time.
Thank you.
Thank you, HD.
Okay, so HD hung up. I don't know about you guys, but I probably need some Excedrin and a nap.
Yeah, I didn't understand a lot of. I followed this thing has vulnerabilities, but when he's like, and then I saw a server set up outside the United States with all of this set up openly, and I was like, that means nothing to me, but I'm sure there's people going, no, and you even did that. I was like,
well,
I don't know.
Here's the thing is I get everything he says, but here's what happens. Like sometimes in a podcast, I can listen and I can think about my next question. And if something happens on my screen, I can look. But with HD, I have to shut my eyes and just listen to him because there's so much data coming at you like a fire hose that if I think about anything else besides what he's saying, I'm gonna be lost and I'm not gonna know what he said.
He's definitely a fast mover.
He's a fast talker, but it's also, he doesn't just talk. Like I talk fast sometimes and I stutter over my words and I don't say much. He says encyclopedias worth of information, but he does it at like 200 miles an hour. The guy is like, he's just got to be one of the smartest people I've ever met in my life. And this scanning project is fascinating. It is. I mean, I remember when he launched it back at Derby. And I was sitting in the room thinking to myself, there's no way he's going to scan the whole internet. It seemed like you're going to scan the whole internet and no one's going to kill you and you're going to then release publicly every open port you find. I don't even get what you're talking about right now. Like, this doesn't even make sense. This is silly talk. And he did it. And now they're doing it every 3 hours. I don't even get it. It's like crazy. Truly amazing. I love the whole thing about the Metasploit payloads that they've worked into it. Some of the new things, the persistent shell, the hiding it into PDFs and every kind of file. Just amazing. Really, really just amazing. Not sure if we'll ever get rid of email though, like he said, but.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, it would be great if you could, change the protocol. They could probably shore it up a little bit and then it would still take outside insecure email, but it would say, hey, this email was sent from like unverifiable sources or something.
It's a hard one because even within our team, like we have internal, without giving away the ghost, we have internal systems we use to communicate, chat, and spread information. But email is still used heavily in how we communicate internally. So when he was talking, I was forgetting about the world and I was thinking, how could I do this? How could we as a company implement something like that? And it's not a quick decision. It's not something you can just say, okay, I see how we can do it. Let me move forward. It just seems like it would be such a hard process to move away from email.
I'm standing on my statement about scribes.
I'm not hiring you a scribe. Okay? I'm not hiring you a scribe to sit. Can you imagine how long it would take us to communicate now? Your scribe has to come from Seattle to Pennsylvania to tell me the answer to the question I asked you last week.
Yep.
We would get nothing done.
He'd probably be pretty secure.
Yeah. I don't know. He's still a human. And humans are the biggest problem in the network. You know that.
True.
So, I don't know. Well, I'll tell you this much. I'd rather hire you a scribe than listen to Bruce Hornsby. So, there is something. There is something to be said.
Any and all scribes out there, call me.
Any and all scribes. If you get an actual call from a scribe, I'm going to be shocked. I would love to have a scribe call you, just to see an actual
I'm setting
scribe.
it aside in next year's budget.
Could send in a budget request. Hey, Michelle, what is this extra $100,000 you need? Oh, that's my scribe.
Yeah, exactly. Most of it's papyrus and ink.
Yeah. Papyrus and ink made from snails. Right. That he collected from the shores of Seattle. Yeah, I love it. No, sorry, not happening. Okay, well, guys, that was a fascinating. I really, honestly, have nothing else to say about it because it probably will take me a week just to digest, and then I'll go, oh, I finally get one thing he said. The man is just with feet. Fascinating, and I love the guy. I love him more than Dave Kennedy loves him because I actually showed up.
Dave's going to be sorry he missed this one.
Yeah, I really do think Dave will be sorry. Every now and then we have one of those podcasts that people like download and re-listen to often. And I think this will be one because there's a lot of actionable discussion, things that people can utilize, tools that they'll want to go and check out. I think this will be a pretty heavily listened to podcast.
Well, you won't even have a choice but to re-listen because if you understood everything on the first pass, you're part of the 1 the 1% of the 1% of the 1%.
Yeah.
Everybody else has to re-listen to it to figure out what the heck we just talked about.
Yeah. If you got it on the first pass, you're HD Moore. So everyone else will probably listen to it at least twice. So that's good. That's good. So Jordan, you haven't been here in a while, and you decided to come back on this podcast. I mean, how fascinating is that for you?
Yeah, I was just like, wow, I'm glad I was here for an appearance. However, it would be great if I picked one where I could have actually contributed even a shred of value.
Well, you did. You had a couple good questions. I mean, this is good. You see, what I like is that it wasn't just me and HD chatting, but everyone here had good questions and comments and conversation with them. So that's really good. I think it was good. Okay, well, if you want to follow us, it is Twitter's is Social Engineer Inc. Engineer INC, or Human Hacker. That's the easy one. Websites, social-engineer.org and social-engineer.com. If you are still alive on IRC, you can check us out on irc.freenode.net on channel social-engineer. Don't forget to see us out at DEF CON, and if you can unfortunately not make it to DEF CON, check out the social-engineer.org site. We'll have our schedule up there. We'll have a scoreboard. We'll try to keep as active as possible. And on the Human Hacker account, we will be live tweeting a lot of the events and trying to keep up with pictures and things like that. So if you're not able to make it, you can at least be part of the festivities. Next month is August, so we'll be doing a live podcast right from DEF CON.
Fabulous Las Vegas.
Oh, well, you can take out the word fabulous, but yes, from Las Vegas. So until then, we'll see you.
Swan boats and daisy chains. Can't seem to recall any given name. I see the footprints, how they come, how they go. Was that only a moment or many years ago? My heart is gone.